Welsh Labour has been the dominant political force in Wales for as long as anyone can remember. That seems to be about to change, and the leadership of Wales and the vision for Wales seems to be a battle between, it looks like, Plaid Cymru and Reform, and that's a very interesting and sort of febrile argument that's going to be happening between those two visions for Wales.
Well, joining me now is the man described in Wikipedia as a Welsh actor, Michael Sheen. It is
accurate.
Hello to you. It is this weekend, St David's Day, the National Day of Wales. Can you just explain, what does being Welsh mean to you?
Goodness, I knew you could ask me that. It's very, if it could be summed up in a nice little bite-sized chunk, then it wouldn't be worth anything, really, would it? It's you know, I mean, in one way, you know, a lot of the stuff around nationalism and, you know, patriotism, it's a complete accident of birth, isn't it? Where you're born, who you're born to, is a complete accident. Now, I think most of us feel fairly fortunate that we're born into countries that are, you know, democratic for the moment, and where we have all the wonderful benefits. But I do feel particularly grateful for having grown up in a community that was very loving and supportive and generous and resilient, and you know, and I took it for granted at the time. It was just where I grew up, and it was my family, and it was my community, and it was the place that I lived in, and you just accept that that's, you know, it's probably the same for everybody. And then I had a series of moves, you know, ultimately where I moved to drama school and came to London, and then from London to, you know, I went to America, and eventually back to Wales. And each time I moved, I had a new appreciation for where I came from, because I realized that not everywhere is the same, and the places are different. And I've over time, I suppose, I've realized that not only was the community that I grew up in very particular and had extraordinary kind of unique qualities, but I have found that in Wales, communities generally have shared a lot of those qualities. And of course, you see them in other places as well. But it matters more to me because, you know, it's my particular community and my set of communities. And so I suppose, you know, historically speaking, the fact that many of those communities built up around quite difficult industrial circumstances, and that gave those communities a particular kind of quality. And even though that industry isn't there anymore, a lot of those values are still in those communities. So I recognize that as being particular to, you know, my area in South Wales and Wales generally. But again, you know, it's not unlike other communities, and often I think there's something lovely about coming from a place and meeting someone who comes from a completely different place, and then realizing that you share a lot of things in common. There's something wonderful about that, and it reinforces, I suppose, you know, the place where you come from. Our particular history as well is something that has come to mean more to me over time, and I suppose that has bound me to my country, the history of it, the culture of it, and the communities, the people, the values there. So it means, you know, and then of course there's the geographical, the landscape, the particular kind of landscape, living by the sea, which I grew up by. All of those things, I suppose, swirl together to become what you identify as your homeland. Now, it may be, you know, that other homelands have all the same qualities, but it's my homeland, and it means, you know, a huge amount to me, that mixture of things.
I mean, obviously, you as you say, worked in England and America and elsewhere, but you're also about to play, I think, Owen Glendower later on this year. I mean, is there inevitably within, you know, what we call the United Kingdom, a sort of conflict with England?
Well, it depends on what you mean by conflict. There is a shared history that has, you know, both fellow feeling and working together, and conflict. I mean, that's the nature of a relationship with a dominant culture like the English culture and the Welsh culture, Scottish culture, Irish culture. It's always going to be a roller coaster ride. You know, and even within Wales, you know, people have very different conflicting feelings about that relationship between Wales and England and the British state, I suppose. and a lot of defining who you are can be done through your relationship to the dominant culture and the history of that. I'm really looking forward to playing Owain Glyndŵr and doing Gary Owen's play, because I think it's really important for us to ask those questions and to look at that history, and not just about the historical aspect of it, but what it says about now, and where we're at now, and we'll be doing the play in the aftermath of the elections here in Wales, obviously in May, which clearly is gonna, and we've seen yesterday, and you were up all night seeing change happening in real time. And I think we'll be seeing that undoubtedly in Wales. Welsh Labour has been the dominant political force in Wales for as long as anyone can remember. That seems to be about to change, and the leadership of Wales and the vision for Wales seems to be a battle between, it looks like, Plaid Cymru and Reform, and that's a very interesting and sort of febrile argument that's going to be happening between those two visions for Wales, and I think our play is very much about that, and so we will be exploring that in what I would imagine will be quite a live situation.
What do you think's gone wrong for Labour in Wales, which it has been the dominant party for so many years?
Well, I think it's probably what we're seeing, not just in Wales, but globally, a desire for change, and a feeling that the system that we've all been under is not working. I think everyone acknowledges that we're in a moment of huge transformation, where, whether it's conscious or not, people are sort of feeling that the old order is dying or has died, and there's a lot of anxiety around what the new is going to be, and I'm not sure that the new has quite emerged yet. There's the promise of the new, but I'm not entirely sure that what the new that is being promised is actually going to materialize. I think we're certainly in a sort of a vacuum at the moment.
And I mean, it's part of that possibly going to be the breakup of the United Kingdom. I mean, is Welsh independence really a credible proposition?
I have absolutely no idea. I think my argument around that has always been, it would be wonderful for any nation to get to the point where it has a free choice, rather than being told, no, you couldn't survive. You're not strong enough. You're not smart enough. You're not wealthy enough. You don't have enough going for you to go out on your own. If that was a relationship between two people, you'd see that as abusive, wouldn't you? You can't go off on your own. You can't be on your own because you're not. You wouldn't be able to survive. Well, my sense is that let's get to the point where we can survive, where we do have everything going for us, and then we can choose freely what we want to do. Do we want to be part of, or do we want to be separate from, or alongside? And that, I think that's the key thing, is that Wales needs change for sure. And I think I think it would be wonderful to be able to get to the point where we are thriving. We're not languishing at the bottom of all the tables, and that we can make a free choice as to whether we want to, whether it's worth us, what's going to benefit us the most. But having that conversation, I think, is really important. And one of the things I think has been difficult with Welsh Labour in power for so long is that conversation gets shut down a lot of the time because of I suppose, the relationship between Labour in Wales and Westminster, and for fear of moving into Plaid Cymru's territory. But I think that conversation is a really important one to have, not per se because of independence, but because of what it brings up about where we're at in Wales, economically, socioeconomically, politically, culturally, all of those questions. So I think it's a good thing to talk about.
This time round, this election for the Senedd, are you backing Plaid Cymru? Would it be fair to say that, or not?
Yeah. I think of the parties that look like they have a chance. there's one that has the best interests of Wales at heart, and I don't believe the other one does.
Now, where does the Welsh National Theatre fit into this, which you've put a lot of your efforts, your own money into? What's the purpose of that, really?
Well, it came out of an emergency situation, really, where the first version of the National Theatre of Wales had all its funding cut by the Arts Council. And we were left in a situation where, having had a fairly tortuous journey towards having our own national theatre, suddenly we were looking at it disappearing. And it took such a long time to get one in the first place. The idea of being able to set it up again after it being sort of closed down effectively felt like, that might never happen. So there was a sort of a window of opportunity, it seemed to me, to try and reimagine what it could be. And at that point, I felt like I was probably, best placed to lead that, because I could bring a lot of what I had individually as an actor into making things happen at a time when there was no money, there was no funding, there was no real support there. And so I, jumped into the breach for that. But I think what then I started to realize was that, it's incredibly important, I think, for us all to culturally to have a platform, to have these conversations, national conversations, to be able to understand where we're at now is so important in order to know, well, what are the options moving forward, and to understand where we're at now, we sort of have to be able to understand where we've come from. And one of the, I think, the best sort of arenas for that is through the arts, through culture, because you can imagine things. It's not just a straight ahead conversation. It's something that's a bit more full-blooded than that, and a bit more rounded, I suppose. And so having that platform for those national conversations is incredibly important. And I realized that culturally in Wales, with all the fantastic work that is going on in Wales, what I felt was maybe missing was being able to create somewhere where writers can write the plays they want to write at the scale they want to write them, and tell those big stories about who we are and put them onto big stages. But of course, perversely, it was at a time when there were so many cutbacks happening and there was less money around. So it seemed rather foolish, I suppose, to say, well, no, I'm going to create something that's even bigger, that's more ambitious, bolder, at a time when there's less money and less resources to do it. But, you only have one life, don't you?
Yeah, and what you're doing at the moment, the inaugural production is Our Town. You brought that to the outskirts of London, to the Rose Theatre, having launched it in Wales. That's a sort of an old American play, and I understand you weren't able to vary the text. So how does that work, if you like, in terms of asserting a Welsh identity?
Yeah, no, we have been able to we've worked with the estate to make changes to it, to make it. I mean, all the hymns that are in it are Welsh hymns. There are Welsh place names. We've been able to change quite a bit of stuff. I mean, Our Town is a play that that is, incredibly well known in America. It's probably the most performed play in America. It was first done in 1938 over there. It was a huge influence on Dylan Thomas writing Under Milk Wood. And it's a play that whenever I've watched it or read it, it's had a profound effect on me. It has a profound effect on me each time I come into contact with it. So I knew that it had a huge power. It speaks to what we were talking about earlier, about community, about family, about what are the big moments in a life and what are the small moments in a life. And it always made me think of my background, my growing up, my family, my community. So I always it always resonated for me in terms of my Welsh heritage then. And I always thought it would make, it could have a lot of impact for Welsh audiences. And so when I was thinking about what would be our first production, I sort of thought it's the most fundamental story, really. It touches on the most fundamental things. So for the beginning of a journey with a company, and to introduce ourselves to an audience and to create the relationship with the audience, I thought it sort of can't be anything better than going to the most basic fundamentals of what it is to be a human being. What it always makes me, whenever I've seen it or read it, I come away with a very direct and simple sense of wanting to cherish everything that matters to me, people particularly, in the most direct way. And I've heard people say this after they've seen our production. People say, I just wanted to text my mum, or I wanted to see I had to wake my child up when I got home because I just wanted to look into my child's eyes and say, I love you. It's just the most basic fundamental thing. So, even aside from its Welshness, I thought that is a great place to start. But also, it seemed to really speak to me about Wales and about community. And I thought also that it would have a chance to be able to do that for people within Wales, but also outside of Wales. And I love the idea of taking this world classic and sort of seeing it through the lens of Wales and Welshness, and see how that would affect Welsh audiences. And we've just finished the Welsh part of our tour, and it sort of went above and beyond everything I could have hoped for. It was like doing a play, whether we were in Swansea or Llandudno or Mold. It was like doing a play about that community for the audience there, and it was. So I just thought it sort of absolutely exceeded all my hopes and expectations.
Are you having to adapt it at all for non-Welsh audiences?
No, no, we had our first preview last night at the Rose, so first time really in front of a non-Welsh audience, or a predominantly non-Welsh audience. People laughed in the same places, cried in the same places, stood up at the end. But of course, we're not sure. We have to sort of see how it goes. But I think the lesson I've learned generally, not just with this production, but generally through my life, is that the more specific you are about something, paradoxically, the more chance it has to be universal somehow. If you were trying to sort of second guess what would appeal to everybody, you end up sort of pleasing no one. But by being incredibly specific about it, it seems to speak to people no matter where they come from.
I mean, you've done at the National Theatre in London, you've done Welsh parts. You did Under Milkwood and also Nye about Nye Bevan, the Welsh politician. I mean, all of that obviously in English. Where does the Welsh language fit into the Welsh identity for you?
Well, I grew up in an area that didn't have a lot of Welsh language spoken. I never really heard the Welsh language being spoken in my community, particularly in that part of South Wales. There was a lot of people coming from, in the Industrial Revolution, coming from outside of Wales down to the mining communities and that kind of stuff. And so just historically, there was not as much Welsh spoken there. So it's something that I've always had a strong feeling for. But paradoxically, it's not something I can speak fluently yet. It's I definitely want to be able to perform in Welsh before too long. That would be my great hope. We have a fantastic National Theatre in Wales for work in the Welsh language, Theatre Cymru, run by Steffan Donnelly. Steffan is going to be co-directing Owain and Henry with me. And we're already planning co-productions between the two companies. So that's really exciting to see how the two companies can work together and how the two languages can work together on stage. So I think that collaboration is something that is really exciting. And for me personally, I'm really hoping and looking forward to being able to perform in Welsh as well as English before too long.
You are obviously very constructive and very upbeat. How depressed are you about the state of the world?
I think it's a very anxious time. It's that Gramsci quote, isn't there? The old is dying, but the new cannot yet be born. And in that vacuum between the death of the old and the emergence of the new, extremism can get sucked into that vacuum, and people can get the anxiety that sort of used to talk about the millennial anxiety, didn't they? Or at the end of Queen Elizabeth I's reign, there's this gap, there's this, and we seem to be clearly going through that, which is very frightening because obviously we're seeing the rise of all kinds of things that we thought had maybe disappeared, and also the fragility of knowing that democratic nations are still a very experimental thing, I suppose, something that's still quite new. and young, and not necessarily the norm. So it's a lot of battles that I think I certainly grew up thinking had been won and maybe won forever. Of course, they're not, and they have to be refought again. But I think if you wanted to be optimistic and positive about it, I think also there's the opportunity for renewal and change. I think, as I said before, I think most people acknowledge that the old does not work for us anymore, that things need reimagining, revisualizing, and a new vision for how we live together needs to happen, because the old one ain't working and is being exploited. And so this is the opportunity for change. And whilst there's an opportunity for change, as scary and as anxiety making as that is, it's also potentially something incredibly positive. It's up to us, isn't it? How we
I
make
mean,
that happen.
there's a big paradox, isn't there? That on the one hand, identity and community is clearly very important, but on the other hand, that can turn into nativism and jingoism to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that tightrope walk is one that we're going through. I think definitely people, no matter whether they're voting for Labour, Plaid, Reform, whatever it might be, you can see that there is a desire for a sense of community, of togetherness, of feeling like we're together, and a sense of being sort of taken advantage of, and being exploited by other groups. And that tussle, that battle, manifests itself in different ways with different faces and different masks, but it's essentially the same battle that everyone's going through. And I just hope that we can make it work without a sort of an apocalyptic resolution. I hope that we can, people are always, in everything I do, in my work, my career, and all the stuff I do outside of my work, I'm always amazed by the resilience of people and the ability for people to help each other and work together. It's when things get removed from actual experience, and when people feel they're fighting invisible forces somehow, and it's those people over there and the other. That's when it seems to get dangerous. When you're actually dealing with the person standing next to you, it tends to bring the best out of people, I think.
Michael Sheen, thank you very much indeed.